So I'm going to give a real talk right now about a real life situation that happened today in school and what it's like to be an educator right now. So today, for an entire 90-minute block and then some, we were in a lockdown, which means there is an immediate threat to safety of students and staff, and that means the lights go off, the doors are locked, and you get away from doors and windows out of sight. Now, the good thing is that just this morning I taped the locking mechanism of each of my classroom doors closed to keep it locked, because students like to unlock classroom doors from the inside so they can walk in and out at their convenience and let their friends in and what have you. So because I taped it, my classroom was secure. So for 90 minutes, I sat there with my favorite group, my chamber choir, plus one piano student, because what happened is a fight started in the cafeteria, and then after the lunch bell rang and the next class period started, just about 6 more fights happened in the same corner of the building as close to my classroom over by the gym. And just a swarm of kids, and about 20, I guess, were involved in various different fights. None of mine. All of my kids ended up being safe. Even if they didn't all make it into my classroom, I eventually learned. But for that time, we did what we were supposed to do. We stayed where we were supposed to stay. We kept our volume silent or at a whisper. And for that time, we talked about various kinds of things. We talked about how this is all because of the fights. It's highly unlikely that there is like a weapon as a threat, but we know that that's a possibility with these lockdown situations. And there was one point where I asked the students that were with me if it would be okay if I prayed. And everybody in agreement said that was okay. And I prayed the Lord's Prayer. I prayed the Serenity Prayer. I prayed, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. I don't know the official title of that prayer right now, but I prayed that one. I quoted Joshua 1:9 because that's on my necklace here. To be strong and courageous, because God is with you, is the shortened version. And then I just prayed for safety. I prayed for the building. I prayed for my students. I prayed for protection and for peace, for the trauma of this whole experience, and just shared my love for them. And I got emotional and teary for a minute. But it was an opportunity to share Christ. And that was a wonderful thing, because they will never forget that, and especially because most of those students were seniors, they will never forget that their third week into their senior year during a lockdown, that their teacher prayed with them and prayed over them. We already have a bond, but these are things that keep us bonded, So even in the midst of a situation where these kids are scared and it is my job to protect them, I was able to share Christ with them. And that was a wonderful thing. And then, of course, they lifted their lockdown code to transition students to the last block of the class, or last block of the day. And we all are like in disbelief of what are we supposed to do now? Just go about like things are normal? And the obvious answer is of course not, but that's the expectation. So my last class makes their way in, and my other kids that were supposed to be in my previous class that were in different rooms came down and like said hello and checked in and all that. So that was good. But when my last class came in, I just said, you know what, let's just come and sit in the front and let's just be people. And they were like, I like that. Let's just be people. It's like, exactly. We do not have to sit here and pretend like everything is fine, this is normal, and that this is okay. You know, one of my favorite sayings in these times is like, just because something like this seems so normal and routine in today's world, it doesn't mean that we have to be okay with it. Like, it's okay to not be okay with this being the reality. And I said, I'm not. And we talked about that, you know. We talked about how tomorrow's supposed to be Third Friday, and that's our count day, and we're supposed to rely on that to get our budget and keep jobs and keep the school open. And these kids are like, why on earth would we come back? You know, and if I was a parent, I would be like, why aren't you calling off school? This was traumatic. But they're not going to do that. It's going to be any other day, and enrollment's going to be low, attendance is going to be low, and it's going to be, you know, it's not going to be good. So instead, what happened in my music class is that I said, you know what, school appropriate, of course, but let's just play whatever songs you want to play right now. You know, songs that you love and that you feel like singing and listening to. And that's what we did for the class period. And let me tell you something. These kids actually know modern worship groups. I got requests for Elevation Worship, Maverick City, Kirk Franklin, all these different artists, a lot of them gospel inspired. And they're like singing their heart out, and I'm singing with them. And one of the kids who was sort of involved in this fighting thing previously, like I saw him being escorted away, but I guess he wasn't directly involved, so he got to stay. But he kind of has a mouth on him as far as profanities. And he was like jamming to Gyra by Maverick City Music, and we were jamming together, right? And then later on, after that song was done, we were listening to something else, and he uttered a couple of, you know, profanities towards another student. I said, hey man, you know, it's interesting that you can worship the way that you just did, but then you turn around and you say all these things. And I said, remember, man, that God cares about every careless word. So you should be thinking about that every time you say the things that you say when you worship one way and then live another way. And he looked at me for a moment, and he thought about it, and he nodded. And again, another moment to teach about Jesus, to teach about the gospel, to minister to these kids through a tragedy. I mean, maybe tragedy is a strong word, but through a traumatic experience, to minister to these kids. Like, yes, today was emotionally draining and exhausting because of what happened. But because of that, I was able to share Jesus with 2 out of my 3 classes today. And I even shared a little bit actually in my first class. Because we were talking about current events. And Charlie Kirk came up and we talked about, even if you don't agree with somebody, that doesn't justify murder. It's one thing when you are expressing your First Amendment rights to freedom of speech and religion. Is another thing. If you are like a terrorist, like killing people, and the only way to stop you is stop you, right? There are big differences there. Was part of the topic of conversation, and at least we could agree that standing up for your faith, at least I mentioned for me that if I go down for my faith and my beliefs, I'm at peace with that. So I actually got to minister to all of my classes today, and that is something that only God can do through a trauma. That is God at work, and there is peace in my heart and in my spirit about that. And I am so glad that I have my faith, because without it, where would I be in this kind of experience?